So good morning, everyone. My name is Robin Critchard, and I'm the Quality Manager here at Integrity QHSE. So thank you very much for all those attending today's webinar. This will be led by Jamie Murray, who is our Technical Assurance Manager. Now, before we start the presentation, I'm just going to provide you with a short introduction about Jamie, who recently celebrated his first year with us. Now, Jamie has undertaken a wide variety of roles during his working career, but more recently has been a survival and marine instructor, then took up the role of HSEQ manager at a multinational training company, after which he performed the same role at a telecommunications provider before moving into consultancy and building up a track record of delivering HSEQ management system solutions within the oil, gas, renewable, and construction industries. Now, in keeping with the consultancy role, Jamie aims to develop and facilitate solutions for the HSEQ issues that many businesses face today, translating what might appear to be complex challenges into achievable opportunities. And it is one of those issues that Jamie will speak to you about today. I'll now hand over to Jamie, who will take you through the rest of the webinar, which will include a Q&A session at the end. So enjoy. Over to you, Jamie.
Thank you, Robin. Thank you, everybody, who's taken the time this morning to join. I'm not sure how long this presentation will take. It's all reasonably straightforward stuff, and I hope we'll be covering ground that most of you will have experienced and or thought about or mulled over the years of your respective careers. The title of the webinar is Reduce Headcount and Cost with a Subscription QHSE Model. All right. What we're going to start with then is have a little look at the business reality, okay, and the hidden costs of fixed QHSE functions. All right, we'll look at the hidden cost trap, or why demand for competence is variable rather than flat. We'll look at what a subscription model looks like in practice. We'll look at what we call the economics of attention. It's how you marshal finite resources to infinite needs, shall we say, and where energy goes, attention flows. How we make use of that, because if energy is flowing in the wrong place, the attention goes in the wrong place, and we can sometimes be blind to certain events and weak signals and whatnot. We'll look at where the value comes from regards a subscription QHSE model as provided by ourselves, Integrity QHSE. And then we're going to look at this idea of matching support to your individual, looking through what they call the STARS lens. And to tie everything together, we'll look at key takeaways, questions and answers just at the end. So if you do have any questions, feel free to pop them into the chat, and I'll do my level best to answer them to your satisfaction when we get a moment. So, find my cursor again. All right. Before getting into the new model, it's kind of worth reminding ourselves of the problem that I discussed in a previous webinar, and it's this idea of the paradox of compliance, okay? So many organizations do want good QHSE performance by whatever benchmark that might be in whatever region of the world you're in, but we can find it hard to maintain momentum, and it's always this tension between operational priorities versus your compliance priorities, which mean everything to us technical types, but maybe don't translate that well to people who are tasked with the pointy end of the spear actually penetrating and doing the job it was designed to do, you know, to attack the operational problem. So we've always got this tension of competing operational priorities. Okay, limited in-house expertise. QHSE is one of the shorter versions of our job role, or my job role. I sometimes call it the QHSE alphabet, and you'll see various complying functions with an increasing number of letters tagged onto them to describe their role. It's almost like the kitchen sink, or sort of the drawer in your kitchen, which has all the stuff that doesn't really have a home. I sometimes wonder if that's how our job role is viewed. So what I'm trying to say here is it's a broad subject area that is multiplied by whichever industry you're in, the number of people you have, and of course the risk profile changes as well. So you've got elements of engineering all the way through to social anthropology and everything in between, biology, chemistry, physics, engineering, science, and so on. And quite often your QHSE team will be tasked with understanding all this and trying to find a solution that delivers compliance and people that are healthy and safe, despite the fact that they're maybe not experts in these fields, and they may not even know that. So it really is a compounding problem. Growing administrative load from ISO requirements and audits. This is probably my pet hate. I agree we need a management system framework, and ISO does provide a good framework, but I do believe that quite often, for various reasons, it's worth another webinar to be fair, the amount of time we spend trying to satisfy third-party certification bodies can be disproportionate to the amount of time we actually have available to manage the real risk in our businesses. Now, that's not a fault of the standard, it's just how it's implemented throughout industries, I think. And of course, the increasing client expectation piece. Tenders is a classic example. Do you have ISO 9001, 14, 45, 27? Take your pick. Yes, we do. Excellent. Here, answer all these questions that you get asked during your certification or your surveillance audit. So it's a double whammy. And 9 times out of 10, depending on where you are in the tender process, you probably won't get asked any further. Okay, so you end up spending a week filling in a complicated tender submission that isn't actually looked at by the team at the other end unless you get further on into the process. So yeah, there's definitely efficiencies that could be learned and made at that point in our admin workload. So that's just one example. Continued possession of certifications and accreditations becomes a metric of success. So we are technicians. Everybody else in our organization typically let's call them lay persons for want of a better description. How we look at the management system and the achieving of certifications, etc., is usually slightly variable compared to how other people look at them. Some people will look at them in the sense they just want the certification. They agree we should have a good management system, fantastic, but they definitely want the certification because that's a badge of honor. So that then becomes the metric of success for your QHSE department. You know, you could have an amazing QHSE function, really managing risk well, but it's the certification and the number of NCs that you get if you measured against. Now, we know that NCs are actually an indication of self-improvement. They're not something to be avoided. It's not you must get your certification and never ever get NCs thereafter. Okay, that would be suspicious to my mind. You should try for it, but it doesn't mean you've done something wrong. It just means you've paid the third-party certification body to cast an independent set of eyes over what you're doing. If they find something, fabulous. Okay, thank you for finding that, and that's money well spent. So, why this conversation matters? In trying to comply, organizations often build increasingly complex management systems, adding forms, processes, audits, metrics, supplier qualification bodies then get involved as well, until the system itself actually becomes what they call the dominant consumer of those finite resources, okay? As an organization scales, it typically only gets worse, all right? And then what we end up with is often a reactive culture because we don't have enough resources to be proactive. And then the QHSE, and it's a bit of a trope, gets attention when something goes wrong rather than being built into day-to-day operations. And then we're fighting fires. So a good way to sort of visualize it is this this curve, the stability of effort. It's just an analogy in graphical form, but effectively we've got time on the x-axis and we've got resource intensity, you know, information, energy, and materials on the y-axis. The red curve here simply dictates that a reactive function will tend to be quite sporadic, unpredictable, and have, you know, massive spikes at various points over time. what we want to do is marshal our resources such that that curve begins to flatten out. So the more effective model, all right, is to apply smaller amounts of capability more consistently. So the goal is not zero effort, it's just more stable, predictable rhythm of prevention improvement over time rather than lurching from crisis to crisis, because our resourcing model doesn't necessarily fit the reality of our operating model. So, infinite want, finite resource. Yeah, it's the heart of it's a basic business truth, I suppose. Every organization has an unlimited appetite for assurance, but it's only got a finite budget, time, and competence. And competence is a big one because QHSE can cover a range of different subjects to different depths. And again, that can differ depending on geography, activity, time of year. So, you know, it's a wicked problem, as some people call it. The law already reflects the reality by expecting clear arrangements, competent support proportionate to actual risk, not perfection in every direction. Okay, so the law recognizes, as you'll all know, that we can't keep people 100% safe 100% of the time, but we do need to have marshaled our resources where the risk is. Okay, thus you will find in airports the amount of time that is spent keeping the concourse nice and clear, well lit, without trip hazards for the many millions of people that transit through Heathrow every year, okay, is more than is spent on reducing the likelihood of slips, trips, and falls in a warehouse, for example, or on an offshore drilling platform, okay. The expectation on a drilling platform is the time, effort, and resources goes to where the big risk profile is there. And it's up to the employer to figure that out, all right? So the real challenge is not whether we want better QHSE performance. We always do, okay? It's how we resource it sensibly and proportionately. And that immediately hits a bit of a bottleneck when we say, yes, we've got a fixed capacity, okay? So this is where the idea of a subscription model begins to allow us to be a bit more flexible, a bit more agile, a bit more responsive, okay? So we've got an unlimited appetite for assurance, finite resources, budget, competence, and time. The law expects clear arrangements and competent people proportionate, okay, to the real risk, and it quietly acknowledges scarcity, not perfection. So it recognizes there is scarcity, and it says you need to be canny about it. Okay, safety must be achieved through sensible use of finite resources. All right. That means the people, time, money, and attention needs to be directed at the real risk. So what does a subscription model look like? Quick definition before we crack on. Ongoing access to QHSE capability each month with the flexibility to dial up or down the level of support as your risk changes, okay? In simple terms, it means ongoing access to QHSE capability each month, okay? You create a baseline of support for core requirements and then bring in extra hours, seniority, specialist input when projects, incidents, or audits are required, or growth creates a temporary surge in demand. Okay, so you've got baseline core support, which may be provided in-house. As we'll see later on, it really depends on an organization's situation, how valuable and how clever you can be with this model. So that core requirement could be an existing capability you have, but due to incidents, surge, projects, new scenarios, you may want to draft in extra support at different levels of seniority. So in practical terms, baseline support every month, core compliance taken care of. When you've got new projects, audits, incidents, or growth, then we're unlocking additional hours, seniority, or specialist expertise. And then you return to your baseline once things stabilize, okay? Now, as I said, the right model depends on your risks, your complexity, and your internal capacity, okay? Now, what I'm going to show you is, it's an analog, it's a QHSE resource spectrum, okay? From a consultancy perspective anyway, we have the ad hoc consultancy, okay? So reactive support, we bring in somebody when something goes wrong, Perhaps we have our recertification or surveillance audit coming up, and you might get expert support to help A, do an initial sense check, and then B, help you close out any obvious gaps, etc. As example. Project-based support, okay. Dependent support, we need experts to achieve compliance. So perhaps the project has areas where you don't have the in-house competence, so you will bring in a subject matter expert to support, or perhaps to manage that entire project for you. A retained advisor, so independent support. We're starting to manage our own system. So we have an advisor who is with you on a semi-permanent basis. So you've got what we would call a key account advisor. So that is a point of contact, a focal point, the person that takes on the role of a competent person or assists your manager in the function of an HSE advisor. And they'd be your day-to-day contact, but they're the tip of the iceberg, because beneath it, in a subscription model, you've got a raft of experience across the entire spectrum of competencies who can be dropped in as needed. And then, of course, going up again, you've got a fractional QHSE manager, so integrated function, external expertise, embedded part-time. And again, this is more a case of you've embedded greater seniority into the organization if you feel you need it to provide more strategic overview. So going from a one-shot blip right the way through to strategic oversight and everything in between, and that can vary and flex and change shape as needed as your organization grows. So as you move along that spectrum, the level of integration and value tends to increase, okay? Because then the relationship goes from buying the isolated task, i.e. ad hoc consultancy support with this audit that's coming up, to building capability, improving decision-making, and supporting continuous improvement as you feel you need. Right then. And then finally, we're going to look at what we call the embedded QHSE partner. All right, so there's an independent partnership. We and our QHSE partner drive improvement together. Right, so that's the spectrum. It's an analog, and there's degrees, and there's variation in between. But it's a useful model to look at it in. What I want to look at now is this idea of the economics of attention, because one of the byproducts, I suppose, of having finite resources and an infinite appetite for growth, okay, is we don't always have the energy or the attention available to look in all the right places at the right time, okay? So one of the most useful ways to think about this is through the economics of attention, okay? In a fixed model, attention is spread thin, okay? In subscription models, you can proactively direct expert attention at high value controls, supervision, decisions, where the risk is as you identify, as you see it occurring, as your horizon scan, okay? So what we're saying there, with the fixed headcount, you often get spread thinly across administration, meetings, assurance capacity, competing demands. With a subscription model, if you invoke that capability over time, you're deliberately directing experienced attention towards the high value controls, the most important supervisory decisions, and the areas where early intervention has the greatest payoff, okay? Proper planning and all that. All right then. Now, cost levers. Where do the savings come from? Reduced fixed overhead. Yeah. If you need to flex, you don't need to employ another full-time member of staff. You basically just buy in the competence, for want of a better expression. Okay. No recruitment and churn costs, less idle time, and no single point dependency. So from a cost point of view, the model can create savings in several places. Reducing fixed overhead, you avoid the recruitment and churn costs, okay? You reduce idle capacity during the quieter periods, and you lower dependence on one internal individual. And as importantly, it can also reduce the hidden costs of things like incidents, rework, delays, and management distraction that's involved with recruiting for new resource. So by getting better capability into the system, earlier and more proportionate. So we're still trying to smooth out this reactivity curve and get it as flat as possible. Right then, where do the performance gains come from? They're what we might call coverage levers, so better control effectiveness. So, we've got to identify hazards, decide who could be harmed and how, evaluate our existing controls, put them in place, communicate, and monitor that they're still being effective. If you have a fixed resource and they're completely tied up with your ISO audit, you can guarantee that they're going to have to, paying Peter to pay Paul sort of thing, taking from Peter to Paul. So yeah, there's a lot of attention there. Supervision proportional to the risk. Again, information instruction training and supervision proportional to the risk. The supervision should be in balance to the level of risk in that particular area. Now, depending on the type of work you're doing, increase in capacity, increase in growth, increase in work tempo, etc. You've always got to ask, well, how do we also increase the supervision levels proportionately? And that, again, is an area where extra resource on a very flexible, responsive and agile format can be very valuable in the short term. Faster mobilization then when risk spikes, and improved data and visibility via structured reporting. So the real challenge is a balance and proportion. All right. So that's where the opportunity is. Okay. It's not just in outsourcing, it's in matching the capability and cost to your actual business condition. Okay, so the question is not simply whether outsourcing is cheaper or whether internal resource is better. The better question is how to match capability and cost to the actual business condition you're in. And a subscription model is most useful when it responds to your organization and organization's real situation, rather than forcing every business into the same resourcing shape regardless of pressure, maturity, or risk profile. It's not a one size fits all, it's a solution of best fit. It's what you're wanting to find. That could be very expensive if you're doing it on a full-time employee basis. But if you've got a full-time employee and you've still got little gaps and areas that need repointed, now you've got a compliance clay that you can implement quite easily. Compliance clay, I just made that up just now. I'm not sure if it's the best analog, but hey ho. All right. So what we're going to look at is what we call the STAR model, okay? And what we're trying to look at is your situation and the idea that the right support model should reflect where the business is now rather than where we assume collectively it ought to be, okay? So the STAR model is a business situation framework developed by a guy called Michael Watkins, and it helps leaders match their approach to the context their business or their business function in. It gives a simple business situation framework for thinking about context. And it breaks it into STARS: startup, turnaround, accelerated growth, realignment, and sustaining success. And the point being that different situations would create different QHSE pressures. So the right support model should reflect where the business is now rather than where we assume it ought to be. Okay, so the right subscription shape depends on the situation the business is actually in. So we'll start with startup. The idea here is the business is building from scratch, so the foundation, or the need is foundation, not bureaucracy. Okay. At this stage, your business is going to need basic legal compliance, things like core risk assessments, simple proportionate arrangements, initial competence structures, and lightweight reporting. I had a client who had about 6 full-time employees, 507 documents, and their document management procedure said they would review those documents on a yearly basis. Now, I'm not a mathematician, but 507 documents over 6 people with, let's say there's 300 days in the year availability, you can see how that's already an unreasonable and disproportionate use of their resources. They're going to be spending all their time doing document reviews on a daily basis rather than focusing their efforts on where the real risk is. Okay. So the key message is that an early stage firm needs enough senior judgment to get a safe, credible base, but not the cost burden of a full-time QHSE function before the business can support it. All right, so basic legal compliance, core risk assessments, simple policies and arrangements, and early competence and training structure. Okay, lightweight reporting. Again, I've been in scenarios before where the reporting requirements did not reflect the severity of the incident, shall we say. So a very, very small occurrence, which would be, bordering on maybe not even a non-conformance, but because of the client relationship, it was flagged as requiring reporting, and the report had to be a 5-page taproot for somebody not putting a glove on, for example. And it could take 3 days for somebody to fill out this system, irrespective of the gravity and the severity of the situation. And it just did not suit that organization. Okay, it was too cumbersome, by far. Alrighty. Why a subscription model will fit a startup. Startups usually need senior judgment and essential systems, yeah, but not full-time QHSE hire, okay? Fractional leadership is often sold precisely because on giving early stage businesses senior capability, okay, without the full-time salary overhead. So a startup doesn't need a full QHSE function, but it does need oversight, okay? It does need a senior level of thought right from the start to put in a lightweight framework. Senior level of thought doesn't necessarily mean massive bureaucratic behemoth of a management approach thereafter, but it does need somebody to have thought about it with the right level of competence. The next one in the STARS framework is what they call a turnaround. So in this case, it's where something's broken, drifting, or exposed. Instance, client concerns, poor audit results, weak culture, an improvement notice. Turnaround and transition support is classic use case for fractional leadership because of speed, focus, and independence. So something's gone wrong. It's usually been identified at the senior leadership level, and it needs rapid diagnosis. Quite often, because of instance or perhaps an enforcement response, we need a quick corrective action plan and a reset of controls and supervision. And it's usually a leadership challenge and prioritization. Okay, so this is quite a common one for organizations like ourselves to be introduced into. We notice a problem that has occurred, it might occur, we've noticed some sort of drift, and you bring in expertise that can be mobilized very quickly and apply leverage impartially at the right place in a very short period of time. Okay. Why the subscription fits then? A subscription fractional model gets experience, capability, and fast without waiting months for recruitment. Fractional leaders are often described as better suited to change because they bring focus, speed, and less internal politics. Okay. The next one, STARS framework, is what we call accelerated growth. A business is winning work, adding headcount, opening sites, or taking on more complex projects, okay? Fractional safety services are explicitly marketed for growing businesses and firms managing urgent or high-risk projects, okay? So, you've taken on more work, you've got a new project over the line, you didn't want to resource for it initially because you weren't sure if you were going to get it. And now you suddenly have to pivot and turn and flex and add capability. Great, let's get some ready to go expertise on the ground supporting your teams right away. Now, this is what I like to call the fat pig analogy. We've got our piggy, which is our business, and we want to bring it to market, and we want to grow it. We want it to be a nice, healthy, meaty piggy. Quite often what I notice is organizations will do this, but a lot of the supporting functions needed to support our ever-growing piggy haven't kept pace, and so the legs perhaps aren't quite as strong as they need to be because we've fed the pig too fast, which is okay because the piggy wants to be wants to be fed. But this is definitely one of those areas where I see value in outsourcing QHSE capacity, is to help train those legs or support those legs until they match the growth rate of the rest of the body. Okay, that applies to HR and many other support functions as well. Okay, so accelerated growth, it needs scalable systems, mobilization support, management coaching, and standardization across sites and projects, to name a few. Better data and visibility as well. All right, why does a subscription fit? Growth creates variable demand. Some months you need much more QHSE input than others. A subscription model lets support flex with onboarding. And new projects and operational complexity perhaps catch us on the hop. Okay, right. So a flexible model in this scenario allows support to expand and contract with demand, helping you, an organization, avoid locking into fixed headcount too early while still keeping pace with the business as it scales. All right. Rather than locking into fixed headcount too early. Okay. The next one in the model, we're getting towards the end, is what we call an organization that's in a realignment phase, okay? Some months the demand for competence is moderate, others it rises sharply, okay, due to onboarding, mobilization, or operational complexity, all right? We've gone through the growth phase. Perhaps we are in a phase where we're at the size we want to be. Okay, it's not in crisis, but perhaps it's drifted. So this is another one where you go into a business that's had their management system in place for a few years, and for whatever reason, it's started multiplying. Okay, it's a situation where systems become bloated, work's duplicated, ownership's unclear, and too much energy is being spent on administration rather than control. So the need here is simplification, better role clarity, better targeting of assurance, and better alignment between competence, capacity, and the actual risk. Okay, realignment then, simply put, is stopping QHSE from becoming overhead heavy admin function, turning it back into a risk control function. So it's really just saying, right, let's stop, take a breather, think about where we are, and pare back some of the excess we don't need. In those areas we identify as it impacting our actual day-to-day risk control, for example. So the business is not in crisis. It has drifted, duplicated effort, bloated systems, weak ownership, okay, poor fit between process and risk, or too much admin. The QHSE need here then is simplification, reallocation of effort, role clarity, better targeting of assurance as well. And finally, better alignment of competence, capacity, and risk. Why is the subscription model useful here? It's helpful here because it allows external challenge and redesign without permanently adding another internal layer. Okay, outsourced managers are commonly positioned as bringing a fresh perspective and helping streamline systems while maintaining compliance. Okay, so it's a fresh set of eyes can sometimes see something a little bit more clearly than people that have been in the woods for the last couple of years. Finally, an organization that is in the sustaining success phase. So the business is already performing well, so the risk is not obvious, but complacency drift, stale thinking, or underinvestment because everything appears to be working does occur. What we need here is independent assurance, targeted specialist support, leadership challenge, maturity review, and better attention perhaps to weak signals. Okay. So what we got? It's already performing already. The risk, as I said, is complacency, drift, stale thinking, or underinvesting because things look fine. Okay. QHSE need independent assurance, targeted specialist support, leadership challenge, and maturity reviews. Okay. And perhaps a focus on weak signals and continuous improvement. Quite often, when you're involved in a business that is the sustaining success phase, it is very difficult to notice where the issues might be, and it does sometimes require the I suppose the safety of being the independent challenger from the outside, being the outside pair of eyes, giving objective, critical, but valuable support and opinion, I suppose. All right. So, where does it fit? The high-performing organizations often don't need a large permanent uplift in headcount. What they do need is periodic specialist input, objective review, and surge capacity when projects or risks change. Okay. So, in short, we've looked at the conundrum, which is the fact that we've got finite resources, an infinite appetite for assurance, and an infinite appetite for growth. And as QHSE professionals, we have to balance this tension between operational need and keeping people safe and healthy, okay, and also looking after the business. But we're limited in what we have, and we've identified that our business can be at various different stages through its life. And a fixed headcount can only achieve so much baseline compliance. And even then, depending on where a business is on the scale of startup through to sustain its success, the actual needs of the business from a QHSE perspective may not always align exactly with what a full-time QHSE function is designed for or can provide. Okay. The obvious cost savers are, largely due to the cost of moving people in and out on a full-time basis to match these business needs. Okay, that's pretty straightforward. And the performance benefits, obviously, you've got the right resource in the right place at the right time. That's great. But I think the key thing is to ask, well, where is it actually going to be useful in my business? At what point am I at? It's not just a QHSE advisor. It's a specific tool for a specific problem. Okay. So the question I would ask you to consider is, where could outsourcing add most value in your organization's journey? So where in our current QHSE stage is internal capacity being stretched most? Are we using skilled people on high value, high risk work, or tying them up in admin and system maintenance? Which activities would benefit most from independent external challenge or specialist competence? And at your current stage, do we need permanent headcount or more flexible capability at the right time? And finally, what would help us move from reactive effort to a more stable, proactive rhythm of QHSE delivery? Finally, then, I suppose the question is not whether to outsource QHSE, but where external support can create the most value at your current stage of growth, transition, or stabilization. So, if there's one message to carry forward, it's this. The real decision is not outsource versus don't outsource. It's how to match support to the business condition you're actually in. External QHSE capability creates most value when it strengthens ownership rather than replaces it, and that will help organizations focus attention where it matters most, support progress through growth, and transition or stabilization with more flexibility than a fixed model can usually provide at all times over the year. Thank you. What I will say, guys, do feel free to reach out to me on LinkedIn. I'm always happy to talk about this stuff in more detail over coffee. We're based on Queen's Road, so the coffee's questionable, but the banter's good. So if you ever feel you want to come and talk in person, again, just reach out to myself or anybody else in the team, really, and we can definitely set that up. But apart from that, thank you for your time and attention, and perhaps see you all at a website near you or me in the future. Thank you.